There is a city in northern Italy where a sofa cannot be delivered by truck. Not because the truck is forbidden, because there is nowhere for it to drive. Venice is a full city. It has a hospital with an emergency room. It has supermarkets, schools, a fire brigade, a post office. Parcels arrive here from Amazon. Wet concrete arrives for building sites. Fresh fish arrives before dawn. Everything a modern city needs moves through Venice every single day. And none of it moves on a wheel. There are no cars here. No buses, no trucks, no scooters, no bicycles, no delivery vans. In the historic centre, a van has never once turned a corner, because there is not a single corner wide enough, flat enough, and connected to anything a van could reach. The city sits on more than 100 small islands, scattered across a shallow lagoon. Over 400 bridges stitch them together, and every one of those bridges was built for feet. They rise in steps. A wheel cannot climb a step. So the streets of Venice are not streets. They are water. Around 150 canals thread between the buildings, and the buildings open their front doors directly onto them. The water is the road, the boat is the vehicle, and the space where, in any other city, the street would run. That space, in Venice, you can drown in. Five centuries ago, a Venetian named Marin Sanudo tried to describe the strangeness of his own home in a single line. Venezia è in acqua, ma non ha acqua. Venus is in the water, but has no water. Mysterious, he meant it plainly. The city floats in a lagoon, ringed on every side by water, and for the first 1,300 years of its life, not one drop of it was safe to drink. The lagoon is salt. The rain was all they had. Both things are true at once. A city made entirely of water, dying of thirst. A city that needs everything moved, where nothing rolls. Reflective. By every rule other cities live by, Venice should have failed 1,000 years ago. And yet this morning, a nurse reached a patient. A cafe got its milk. A body was carried to its grave. How does a city run with no roads at all? Reflective. To understand Venice, you have to stop seeing the water as scenery. The canals are not romance, they are infrastructure. They are the road network, the loading dock, and the sewer, all at once, all the same water. Reflective. Consider a single morning. A child is born at the city hospital on the northern edge of Venice, its emergency entrance facing not a road, but a canal. The newborn arrives by water, and somewhere across the city, an old man dies in his bed. He will leave the same way, by boat, across the lagoon, to the island of San Michele, where Venice buries its dead on a separate island because the living city has no ground to spare. Between that birth and that death, the whole machine turns. Wonder, bread, and coffee reach 10,000 bars and kitchens. Building stone reaches a scaffold. A washing machine reaches a fourth-floor apartment up a staircase too narrow for two people to pass. Medicine reaches a pharmacy. The waste of tens of thousands of residents and visitors is gathered, carried, and taken away. None of it on a wheel, all of it on water, and on the backs of people who know every bridge by heart. Reflective. It is one of the most complex logistics systems on Earth, and it hides in plain sight, disguised as a postcard. Mysterious. There is exactly one place where Venice touches the land. A single causeway, the Ponte della Libertà, runs almost 4 kilometres across the lagoon from the mainland. It carries the railway. It carries a road. And that road ends, abruptly and finally, at a square called Piazzale Roma. This is the edge of the wheeled world. Reflective. Every car that will ever come to Venice stops here. Every bus, every taxi. They arrive, they unload, and they can go no further. Just beyond lies Troncheto, a small artificial island of concrete and multi-storey car parks. The last place in Venice a tyre ever touches the ground. A short, elevated shuttle, the People Mover, runs between the car park and the square. It is the only rail line inside the city, and it exists for one reason: to carry people across the final few hundred metres that a car no longer can. Wonder. Stand at Piazzale Roma and you can watch the change happen. On one side, engines, horns, the ordinary noise of traffic. On the other side, A bridge over a canal. And then silence. Not quiet. Silence. The particular silence of a city with no engines in it. Mysterious cross that bridge, and something vanishes that you have never once had to think about. The wheel. From here, nothing you own can roll. Except one thing. And you will meet it soon. Reflective. So a pallet of bottled water is sitting on a truck in Marghera, on the mainland. A restaurant in the heart of Venice ordered it. How does it get there? Follow it. Reflective. The truck does not enter the city. It cannot. It stops at the mainland hubs, Mestre and Marghera, or crosses to the terminal at Troncheto, and there, the water is lifted off wheels for the last time in its journey. Now it needs a boat. Wonder. The workhorse of Venice is a low, flat-bottomed cargo boat called the moto-topo. The name means roughly motor mouse. Its deck sits barely above the waterline, so crates can be slid on and off by hand. Its hull is shallow because the small canals are shallow, and at low tide, some of them are barely deep enough to float a loaded boat at all. The moto-topo is the descendant of older craft, the flat topper, the sailing trabacolo, that carried Venice's freight for centuries. The engine is new. The shape is 1,000 years old, because the problem it solves has not changed. Reflective. The water is loaded onto the moto-topo. The boat pulls out into a wider canal, then turns into a narrow one, threading toward the restaurant. But it cannot reach the door. Almost nothing in Venice can be reached directly by boat. The canal runs past the front of the building, or a stone walkway, a fondamenta, runs between the water and the wall. So the boat stops at the nearest canal edge. And now the wheel returns. The one wheel that survives in Venice. Wonder. The porter unloads the pallet onto a carrello, a hand trolley. 2 wheels, a steel frame, a long handle. It is the only wheeled vehicle that works here. And it works because a human being pushes it, lifts it, and drags it. The porter pushes the trolley along the fondamenta. Then the ground rises. A bridge. Steps. Reflective. And here is the exact motion that keeps Venice alive, repeated 10,000 times a day. The porter tilts the trolley back, takes the weight onto their own body, and hauls it up the steps, one at a time. Down the far side, along the next alley, up the next bridge, until the water reaches the restaurant door. That pallet crossed a lagoon on a truck, a canal on a boat, and 6 bridges on a man's back. That is not a delivery. It is a relay, truck to boat to muscle, and every link depends on the one before it. Solemn. Remove a single link and the chain stops. If the tide is too low, the boat is stranded on the mud. If there is no free mooring at the canal edge, the boat circles until one opens. If a bridge is closed for repair, the whole route reroutes on foot. There are no loading bays here, no service roads, no back entrances, nothing in Venice moves alone. Wonder. And everything follows this same relay. Refrigerated mototopi carry the cold chain, meat, fish, dairy, from mainland to canal to kitchen without ever breaking temperature. Building materials travel the same way, lime, bricks, sand, scaffolding, all of it unloaded by hand along the fondamenta and hauled up the face of the building. And when something is simply too large for the stairs, a piano, a sofa, a refrigerator, Venice does what it has always done. A crane mounted on a boat lifts it up and swings it through a window. Reflective. Look up at the old palaces and near the top you will see a wide door opening onto nothing but air. That door is not a mistake. It is a loading bay. For centuries, goods were hoisted straight up the front of the building and pulled inside. The furniture of Venice has always arrived through the windows. Mysterious. Even the parcel from Amazon obeys the lagoon. It reaches a mainland sorting center, transfers to a boat, and finishes its journey on a trolley over the bridges. Prime means something different here. It means patience. Reflective. And all of it runs to a timetable written by the tide. A loaded moto-topo needs enough water beneath it to float, so the smallest canals can only be worked at certain hours, when the sea is high enough to carry a full hull. Mooring space at the canal edge is scarce and shared and fought over. A boat that cannot tie up cannot unload. Deliveries are booked into narrow windows and the crews start before dawn. The markets first, then the hotels, then the restaurants, because by mid-morning the canals are crowded and the tide has turned. In a city with no roads, the traffic jam happens on the water and the rush hour is set by the moon. Wonder. Nothing about it is fast and nothing about it is simple. A crate of glasses, a keg of beer, a bundle of hotel linen, a pallet of tiles. Each one is loaded, floated, moored, unloaded onto a trolley, and hauled by hand up and over whatever bridges lie between the canal and the door. The porters are the last link and the most human. They carry the city's weight on their shoulders, one bridge at a time. And they know things no map holds. Which fondamenta floods first, which bridge has the shallowest steps, which courtyard hides the shortest path to a hidden door. Reflective. People move the way the goods do, by water and then on foot. Venice's public transport is a fleet of water buses called vaporetti, run by the city transport company. A vaporetto is exactly what a city bus is anywhere else, with one difference. It floats. It runs a timetabled route up and down the Grand Canal and out to the islands, stopping at floating platforms tethered to the banks. You wait at a stop that rises and falls with the tide. You step across a gap of moving water to board. Reflective. Tens of thousands of journeys are made this way every day. Commuters, school children, the elderly with their shopping trolleys, all of them moving between islands on a public fleet that never leaves the water. There is a rhythm to it a stranger never sees. The morning boats, heavy toward the hospital and the schools. The evening boats, heavy the other way. A city bus network complete in every respect, except that it floats, and its stops rise and fall with the sea. Wonder. There is a subtlety here that the city solved centuries ago. The Grand Canal curves through all of Venice like a great reversed S, nearly 4 kilometres of water, and along that whole length there are only a handful of bridges. For most of the city's history, there were even fewer. So how does a Venetian standing on one bank cross to the other without walking half a mile to the nearest bridge? The answer still runs today, and it is almost invisible. The traghetto. Reflective. A traghetto is a gondola, a working one, stripped of its decoration, that ferries standing passengers straight across the Grand Canal at fixed points for the price of a coin. 2 oarsmen, a flat crossing, a minute of open water. It is the cheapest gondola ride in Venice and the only one most Venetians ever take. It exists to do the job a bridge would do anywhere else. The gondola you picture, the curved black boat, the singing, is now almost entirely for visitors. But that boat was once the private carriage of the city, and the men who row it learned the water the way a taxi driver learns streets. Reverent. And every one of those boats, the vaporetto, the moto-topo, the ambulance, the gondola, has to be built and mended and kept afloat. So Venice has boatyards, tucked into corners of the city, where a slipway runs straight down into a canal. The oldest are called squarei, and a handful still work the traditional way, building and repairing wooden hulls by hand, hauling them up out of the water to scrape and seal them. A city that runs entirely on boats cannot afford to let its boats fail. The yards are as vital to Venice as a garage is to a city of cars, and far older. The gondola itself is a small marvel of them, slightly lopsided by design, curved so that a single oar, worked on one side alone, still drives it straight. Nothing here is decorative by accident. Even the most beautiful boat on the water was shaped first to do a job. Mysterious, and the same water network reaches out past the city to the other islands of the lagoon. Murano, where the glassmakers still fire their furnaces, its glass carried out by boat. Burano, with its painted fishermen's houses. The Lido, the long sandbar that holds back the sea. Giudecca, across a wider channel to the south. They are not suburbs reached by road. They are stops on a bus route that runs on water. Reflective. Even the airport is part of it. Marco Polo sits on the mainland, and from it, low motor launches run. Across the open lagoon to the city, an airport shuttle that is a boat. And the great cruise terminal, the Maritima, sits at the western edge, though the largest ships are now kept out of the fragile heart of the city, banned from the basin in front of St. Mark's because their wakes and their weight were wearing the lagoon away. Reflective. Nowhere does the whole system come together more plainly than at dawn at the Rialto. For 1,000 years, this bend in the Grand Canal has been the market of Venice, the place where the food of a roadless city arrives and is sold. And much of it does not come from the mainland at all. It comes from the lagoon itself. Wonder. Out on the shallow water, in the grey before sunrise, fishermen work the barren. The low salt marshes and mudflats that the tide covers and uncovers twice a day. This is a living larder, one the tide restocks with every cycle. Sea bass, bream, cuttlefish, soft-shell crabs, clams raked from the mud, herons and egrets hunt the same shallows. Flocks of wading birds lift off the flats as the boats pass. The fish are landed, run up the canals by boat, and laid out on the marble slabs of the fish market by 7 in the morning. By 9, they have been bought, boxed, trolleyed over the bridges and delivered to kitchens across the city. Mysterious. And here is the quiet contradiction at the heart of the market. The lagoon that feeds Venice is the same water Venice cannot drink. The same salt water that flushes its sewers and floats its boats. The city eats from the water it pours its waste into. Kept edible only because the tide never stops carrying that waste away. Every fish on the Rialto slab is a debt owed to the tide. Foul the flush, still the sea, and the larder closes with it. Reflective. The market has no lorry bay, no cold store the size of a warehouse. It never needed one. The tide is the delivery schedule. The lagoon is the supplier. The boat and the trolley are the whole supply chain. It is perhaps the oldest fresh food system still running in Europe. And it works for the same reason everything in Venice works, because it was shaped exactly to the water it sits in. Mysterious. But before any boat can float here, before any of this can run, something underneath has to hold. And what holds Venice up is stranger than what floats on top of it. Mysterious. Venice is a city of stone. Marble palaces, brick churches, bell towers that weigh thousands of tons, and all of it stands on mud. The lagoon floor is soft, silt and clay and sand, nothing you could build on. Drive a stake into it and it sinks. So the first Venetians did something that should not have worked. They drove millions of wooden piles into the mud, packed so tightly they touched until the ground itself was more wood than earth. Reverent. Picture the work. A crew of men called battipali, pile drivers, stand on a platform above the water. Between them hangs a heavy weight on ropes. They haul it up and let it fall. A sharpened wooden pile is driven a finger's width deeper into the mud. They haul and let it fall. Again. And to keep the rhythm, they sing. The songs are real. Slow, repeating, handed down. A chant to time the falling weight, praising the city and its saints. A single pile might take a day. A single building might need thousands. Wonder. Beneath the mud, they were searching for one thing. Several meters down lies a hard, dense layer of ancient, compacted clay the Venetians called caranto. It is not rock, but it is firm enough to carry a load if the weight is spread across enough piles. So the builders drove their trunks down until they struck it, around 9 piles for every square meter, then sawed the tops off flat to make a level bed. Beneath one church, Santa Maria della Salute, stand more than 100,000 piles. The Rialto Bridge rests on some 14,000. St. Mark's Basilica sits on around 10,000 trunks of oak. No one knows the true number under the whole city. The estimates run into the tens of millions. An entire forest, felled in the mountains, floated down the rivers and driven upside down into a swamp. Reflective. And here is the part that defies sense. The wood did not rot. Sealed under the mud, away from air, the piles could not decay. Instead, over centuries, minerals seeped into the wood and hardened it until the soft alder and larch turned nearly to stone. The trees petrified. Venice is not floating. Venice is standing on a drowned forest that has slowly turned to rock. Reflective. Where the hard caranto lies too deep to reach, the builders used the piles a second way, not to stand on the clay, but to squeeze the soft ground itself. Driven close enough together, the trunks compact the mud between them until the loose lagoon floor becomes firm enough to bear a wall. It is a foundation made not by finding solid ground, but by manufacturing it. Even so, nothing here is truly still. The whole city settles, a few millimeters at a time, sinking as the ground compresses under 1,000 years of stone. For much of the last century, that sinking sped up as industry on the mainland pumped groundwater out from beneath the lagoon until it was stopped. Venice does not sit on rock. It sits on an argument between weight and water that has been running, quietly, for over 1,000 years. Reflective. On top of that forest, the builders laid a plate of white Istrian limestone, shipped across the Adriatic, a dense, almost waterproof stone that the tide cannot soak. Wood at the bottom where it never meets air. Stone at the waterline where the wet can never climb. Brick and marble above, 3 materials, each doing a job the others could not, holding up a city on a foundation of mud. Wistful. The men who drove those piles left a saying that survives in the Venetian dialect to this day, una testa da batter pie, a head good for pounding piles, meaning someone slow, someone dull, a joke about the hardest, most patient work there was, The joke outlived the work. Whether the songs will outlive the singers is another question, one we will come back to. Mysterious. Which brings us back to Mare Sanudo and the strangest problem Venice ever solved. Venice is in the water, but has no water. Reflective. Think about what that means for a living city. You can float your boats on the lagoon, but you cannot drink it. You cannot cook with it. You cannot wash in it without ruining your clothes with salt. A city of 100,000 people needs fresh water every single day. And Venice sat in the middle of an ocean of the wrong kind. There were no rivers on the islands, no springs. There was only the rain. Wonder. So the Venetians turned their entire city into a machine for catching it. Reflective. Look at a Venetian square, a campo, and you are not looking at a plaza. You are looking at the lid of a water tank. Beneath most squares, the Venetians dug a great pit, several meters deep, and lined it with a thick layer of clay aimed to hold the rainwater in and keep the salt lagoon out. They filled the pit with sand, and in the very centre, they built a shaft of specially fired brick, laid with gaps so water could seep through. Then they shaped the square itself. The paving was tilted, sloped gently from the edges down toward the middle. At the low points sat stone grates. When it rained, every drop that fell on that square ran across the stone, down through the grates and into the sand below. The sand filtered it slowly as it sank, and at the bottom, clean, it gathered in the brick shaft, the well. Wonder. The ornate stone wellhead at the centre of a Venetian square is not decoration, it is the tap. The whole square around it is the filter. The Venetians built their public squares as rainwater collectors first and meeting places second. The campo was designed around the well, not the other way round. There were close to 6,000 of these cisterns beneath the city. Every square had at least one. In a good year, they held enough, around 10 litres per person a day, carefully rationed, in a city where fresh water was more precious than the marble. Reflective. The building of them was a duty the state took seriously for centuries. When the city grew, its councils ordered new wells dug by the dozen. Convents were paid to build cisterns on the condition that their water be shared with anyone who came. Some were reserved for the poor, so many were sunk in squares, courtyards and gardens that the collecting surface of the city's cisterns is thought to have covered close to a tenth of Venice itself. A tenth of the city was, in effect, a rooftop for catching rain. Solemn. But rain is not reliable. In a dry year, the cisterns ran low, and when the level fell far enough, salt began to creep in from below, and the water in the wells turned brackish and sick. In the worst droughts, the poor drank it anyway, and fever followed. There were years when the failing water and the sickness that came with it was spoken of in the same breath as plague. Reflective. So Venice built a second system on top of the first. Watermen, the acquaroli, rowed flat barges out to the mainland rivers, filled them with fresh water, and carried it back across the lagoon to top up the cisterns by hand. A whole trade existed for one purpose, to bring water to a city surrounded by it, and the Republic watched over all of it. Access to the public wells was controlled. Their upkeep was a matter of state. For a maritime empire, the ability to make its own fresh water was not a convenience. It was independence. A city that could water itself could not be starved out by a siege. Wonder. This went on for more than 1,000 years, and then, on a summer night in 1884, it ended. June 1884. A new aqueduct, a single great iron pipe laid across the lagoon bed from the mainland, reaches Venice for the first time. To celebrate, the city raises a fountain in the middle of St. Mark's Square and lights it at night with artificial light, so the water seems to leap out of the ground as if by magic. Venetians come out in the dark to watch fresh water pour freely from the earth in a city that never had any. Reflective. The 6,000 cisterns were closed. The wells became ornaments, many still stand in the squares, capped and dry, and the water that flows from every Venetian tap today still crosses the lagoon the same way, through a pipe that rides the causeway. The same narrow bridge of land that carries the trains, the cars that die at Piazzale Roma, and the trucks that never enter. Mysterious. One thin line of connection to the mainland now carries almost everything the city cannot make for itself. Cut it, and Venice, a city standing in an endless expanse of water, would go thirsty within days. The old paradox never really left. It was only moved onto a single pipe. Reflective. Everything that comes in must eventually go out. And a city with no roads has no rubbish lorry. So how do you collect the waste of a whole city that a truck can never reach? Wonder. The same way you deliver to it, in reverse. Reflective. Each morning, collectors walk the alleys on foot, pulling large carts. In the residential districts, they announce themselves the old way in calling out as they come, "Spazzino," so that residents can bring their bags down and hand them over directly. On most corners, there are no communal bins at all. There is no room for them. The waste is gathered by hand, house by house, bag by bag. The full carts are wheeled by muscle over the same bridges to the canal edge where a waste boat waits. The bags are loaded aboard. The boat carries them out of the city to the mainland where at last a truck can take over. Reflective. A whole city's rubbish, lifted by hand, carried by boat, and touched by an engine only once it has left. The job that takes a lorry and 2 workers an hour in any other city takes, in Venice, a small army walking the same bridges the deliveries came in on. The city that receives everything by water and muscle must also surrender everything the same way. What arrives on a man's back leaves on a man's back. Reflective. There are refinements the system has learned over centuries. If a household misses the morning call, there are fixed points where waste can be left and floating collection stations that move through the districts on a schedule. Bulky things, a broken chair, an old mattress, are booked in and taken by boat, like any other cargo. Nothing can simply be wheeled to a curb because there is no curb and no lorry to meet it there. Every stage of it has had to be invented from scratch to fit a city shaped like no other. Solemn. And then there are the moments when minutes decide everything. Somewhere in the city, an old woman has collapsed. Her family calls for an ambulance. In any other city, a van with a siren races through traffic. Here, there is no van, and there is no traffic. There is only water, and bridges a stretcher cannot climb. Reflective. So the ambulance is a boat. Venice runs a fleet of them, sleek, powerful craft with a flashing light and a siren, crewed by paramedics that carve through the canals at the fastest speed the narrow water allows. The main hospital has its own dock, its emergency entrance opening straight onto a canal so a patient can be carried from boat to bed without ever touching a street. But the boat can only go where the water goes. And not every door in Venice sits on a canal. Solemn. So for the last stretch, the alley, the bridge, the narrow stair, the crew runs on foot, carrying the patient by hand, the way everything in Venice travels the final few meters. The most advanced emergency medicine in the world, delivered at the end by 2 people lifting a stretcher up a flight of stone steps. Reflective. The fire brigade works the same way. Fireboats with water cannons draw straight from the canal. A city built on water need never run out of water to fight a fire, but the hoses and the ladders still cross the last bridges on the shoulders of the crew. Even the police patrol by boat. Mysterious. It is a strange kind of trust, to live in a city where help cannot come in a straight line, where saving a life depends on a crew knowing every canal, every dead end, every low bridge by heart, because the map that matters here is not a map of streets. There are no streets. It is a map of water and of tides. Reflective, which raises the last question and the deepest one. We have moved goods, people, water, waste, and the sick all across the surface. But there is one system we have not looked at, the one underneath. Where does it all go? A city of tens of thousands of people, with no modern sewers beneath most of its stone, where does the waste of daily life actually end up? Mysterious. The answer is the same answer to every question in Venice. The water. But not the water you can see. The water that moves. Reflective. For most of its history, and still, in much of the old city today, Venice has no sewage plant of the kind you would recognize. Instead, beneath the pavements run narrow brick tunnels, centuries old, called gattoli. They gather the wastewater and the rainwater together and carry it a short distance into the canals. Solemn, which sounds like a catastrophe. A city pouring its waste straight into the same water its boats float on. And left alone, it would be. The canals would turn to poison within a week. Wonder. They do not, because the water in the canals does not stay still. Twice a day, the sea comes in. Reverent. This is the secret at the very center of Venice, the thing that makes all the rest of it possible. Not the boats, not the piles, the tide. Reflective. The Venetian lagoon is not a lake. It is open to the Adriatic Sea through 3 great gaps in the barrier islands. 3 inlets at the Lido, at Malamocco, and at Chioggia, and through those inlets, twice every day, the tide flows in, and twice every day, it flows back out. When it rises, seawater pushes up every canal in the city, filling them, lifting the boats, raising the water at every doorstep. When it falls, all of that water drains back out toward the sea, and it does not leave empty-handed. It pulls the contents of the canals out with it. The waste the Gattoli poured in at low tide is flushed out at high tide, carried through the inlets, into the lagoon, and away toward the open Adriatic. The salt in the seawater helps break it down. The sheer volume dilutes it. Wonder. Venice's sewer is the sea itself. Twice a day the tide walks through the entire city, washes it, and carries the dirt away. No pumps, no power, no treatment plant, just the moon, pulling the water in and out through 3 gaps in a sandbar for more than 1,000 years. Reverent. The old Republic understood exactly how fragile this was. They created a magistracy, the Magistrato alle Ac, the masters of the waters, with power over the entire lagoon. No one could dig, dredge, or build in it without their permission. They diverted whole rivers away from the lagoon so that silt would not fill it in and choke the tides. They paid men to sit in boats and measure the flow, because they knew that the day the tide stopped moving through Venice was the day the city would begin to die. The tide moved the boats. The tide flushed the city. The tide fed the lagoon and everything living in it. Everything, every system we have followed, rested in the end on that one thing. The rise and fall of the sea, twice a day, through 3 inlets. Solemn. But even the strongest system has a limit. In the last century, the old bargain began to break as the city grew, and detergents and dishwater and modern life filled the Gattoli with things the tide could not easily break down. And as the tunnels themselves fell into disrepair and clogged, the flush could no longer keep up. The canals thickened. The smell that visitors once wrote home about was the sound of a 1,000-year-old system straining against a world it was never built for. Today, thousands of septic tanks catch the worst of it first, but underneath, the city still leans, as it always has, on the sea coming in and going out. Solemn. And now that same tide is turning against the city it built. Reflective. The sea is rising, the land beneath Venice is slowly sinking, and more often the tide does not stop at the doorstep, it comes over it. The Venetians have a name for it, aqua alta, high water. When a high tide, a low pressure storm, and a warm south wind called the Sirocco all arrive together, the sea is pushed up into the lagoon and cannot drain, and it floods the lowest parts of the city first. St. Mark's Square, which sits at the very bottom, goes under first of all. On the worst days, raised wooden walkways are set out across the flooded squares, and the city moves above its own streets on planks. Reflective. The city has learned to read the water before it arrives. Tides are forecast days ahead from a weather tower standing out in the open sea beyond the inlets, and when a high one is coming, warnings go out across the whole city. A rising set of tones sounded over the rooftops, and now an alert on every resident's phone. Venetians know their own front step by the centimetre, the exact height at which the water will reach the door, and they plan their mornings around it. Rubber boots stand ready by the entrance. The walkways come out. For centuries, living here has meant knowing the sea intimately enough to stay one tide ahead of it. Solemn. In November of 2019, the water rose to 187 centimetres. St. Mark's Square disappeared. The basilica flooded, shops and homes and centuries of stone stood in the sea. It was the worst tide in more than 50 years, and it was becoming less rare, not more. Reflective. So Venice built a wall against the tide. Its name is Mose. Wonder. At the 3 inlets, the same 3 gaps that let the tide in and out, the city sank rows of enormous hollow steel gates into the seabed. 78 of them, each one a giant. Most of the time they lie flat on the bottom, filled with water, invisible, and the tide flows over them exactly as it always has. But when an exceptional high tide is forecast, compressed air is pumped into the gates, forcing the water out. As they empty, they grow light, they lift. Hinged at the seabed, they swing upward until their tops break the surface, and in about half an hour, a line of steel rises out of the sea and closes the lagoon off from the Adriatic. The tide climbs on the far side. Behind the gates, the city stays dry. When the sea falls again, the gates fill, sink, and vanish back beneath the surface. Reverent. On the 3rd of October, 2020, For the first time in the long life of Venice, an exceptional tide rolled in from the sea, and the gates rose to meet it. The water climbed on the outside. St. Mark's Square, which should have flooded, stayed dry. For the first time in centuries, the city held the sea back. Since then, the barrier has been raised dozens of times, and in a single recent year, it closed against the tide more than 30 times, sparing the city floods that would once have been simply endured. Reflective. It is run from a control room inside the arsenal, the vast old shipyard where the Republic once built the fleets that made Venice a power. The decision to close is never simple. It has to be made hours ahead, on a forecast, weighing a tide that has not yet arrived against the cost of sealing the lagoon. Each closure is expensive, and each one halts every ship, every ferry, every delivery in and out until the gates go back down. And there is a deeper unease beneath the engineering. The lagoon is not just scenery, it is a living system the tide holds in balance. Close the gates too often, and the water behind them stops exchanging with the sea the way it has for millennia, and the delicate life of the marshes and the mudflats begins to suffer. The barrier that saves the city from the sea can, if it is leaned on too hard, slowly harm the lagoon that is the city's true foundation. Mysterious? But here is the trap the whole city is caught in, and it is the same lesson every system in Venice has been quietly teaching from the beginning. Nothing here works alone. Solemn. The gates keep the flood out by sealing the inlets, but the inlets are how the tide gets in and out. And the tide is what flushes the canals, feeds the lagoon, and keeps the water alive. Every time the gates close to save the city from the sea, they also cut the city off from the sea, from the very flush that has cleaned it for 1,000 years. Close them for a few hours and little is lost. But the sea keeps rising, and the forecasts warn that the day may come when the gates must close, not a handful of times a year, but for a large part of it. Reflective. There is a harder limit still. St. Mark's Square begins to flood at around 85 centimetres. The gates are only raised for tides forecast above 110. In between those two numbers lies a band of water the barrier was never designed to stop. The ordinary, rising, everyday high water that comes a little more often every year. Each raising costs a fortune and stops all traffic in and out of the lagoon while it stands. It is a defence, not a cure. Wistful Venice was built on a bargain with the tide. Let the sea in twice a day and it will carry your city on its back. Move your boats, wash your streets, feed your water. For more than 1,000 years, the bargain held. Now the sea has risen enough that the city must, more and more, refuse it. Must lock the tide out to survive the flood, knowing the same act starves the system the tide kept alive. The oldest friend Venice ever had, and the enemy it now builds walls against, are the same rising and falling water. That is how a city runs with no roads. It runs on the tide, and the tide is turning. Reflective. There is one more system in Venice, the one the engineers cannot fix, because it is not made of steel or stone or water. It is made of people, and it is failing. Solemn. Every machine we have followed, the boats, the porters, the cisterns, the tide, the gates, exists for a single purpose: to keep a city livable, to let people be born here, grow up here, work and shop and grow old here. And year by year, there are fewer of them for it to serve. Wistful. In 1951, more than 170,000 people lived in the historic centre of Venice. Today, the number is under 50,000, around 47,000, and still falling. The city loses roughly 1,000 residents every year. Near the Rialto Bridge, in a pharmacy window, there has hung since 2008 a digital counter showing the number of Venetians left. It only ever goes down. Reflective. A resident named Matteo Secchi helped put it there. For years, his group has warned that a city needs its residents the way it needs its water. That without Venetians, Venice becomes something else. Homes turn into short-term rentals because a flat let to visitors for a week can earn what a family would pay in a month. The baker closes, a souvenir shop opens in his place, the school loses its children, and the machine keeps running, precisely beautifully, for fewer and fewer of the people it was built to hold. Most Venetians now live across the water, in Mestre and Marghera on the mainland, where the ground is flat and a car reaches the door. Solemn. The most visited city on Earth is also one of the fastest to empty of its own. Tens of millions of visitors a year move through streets where under 50,000 people still live. Venice does not have the problem of a dying town. It has the opposite. Too many people passing through and not enough staying. The city has even begun charging day visitors a fee to enter, the first city in the world to try it. an attempt to meter a tide of a different kind. Solemn. But the fee does not touch the deeper problem. The residents are not leaving because of a day's crowds. They are leaving because a city built for living has slowly been priced and pressured out of the reach of the people who would live in it. The young couple who cannot find a flat, the family tired of carrying a pushchair over 40 bridges, the shopkeeper whose customers have all become strangers passing through, and each one who leaves takes a small piece of the city's working knowledge away with them. The porter's roots, the fisherman's tides, the pile driver's songs, none of it is written down. It lives in people, and the people are the one part of the machine that cannot be rebuilt from steel. Wistful. The Batapali who drove the piles sang to keep their rhythm, and their joke about a head good for pounding piles still lives in the dialect, but the dialect is spoken by fewer people every year. The songs were made for a city full of workers. The workers are leaving. The piles they drove will hold for centuries more. It is not certain the city standing on top of them will still be Venetian when they do. Reflective. So the question at the end is not the one we began with. We know now how a city runs with no roads. It runs on water and muscle and tide and the patient, invisible labour of people who know every bridge and every canal by heart. That machine works. It has worked for more than 1,000 years, and with its steel gates and its single pipe across the lagoon, it may work a while longer yet. Solemn. The harder question is whether there will be anyone left to run it. A machine can be maintained. A way of life cannot be summoned back once it is gone. You can raise a steel gate against the sea. There is no gate you can raise against a city quietly leaving itself. Wistful. Somewhere on the water right now, a moto-topo is running low and flat through a narrow canal. The little motor mouse, the workhorse we met at the very start. Today it might carry crates of water. Tomorrow, building stone. And one day, as it has for generations, it will carry a Venetian on their last journey across the lagoon. From the city with no roads to the island of the dead on the same tide that first carried them in. Reflective. The whole of a Venetian life moves on that water. The birth, the bread, the illness, the grave. No wheel touches any of it. Only the boat and the muscle and the sea coming in and going out twice a day the way it always has. Thank you for watching. Until the next journey, take a breath and stay a while.